Hello, good morning, everybody. Welcome to Sunrise Daily. Today, I'm Train Belinosa reporting live from Abuja. And remember, the countdown for the big day, the presidential election, is almost there. 30-something days now. You need to remember why you've got to go out there. Get your permanent voter cards if you haven't, because you need to vote. How you doing, guys, in Lagos?
Good morning. My name is Ayo Makide, and welcome to the program.
Well, he asked how we're doing. We're preparing to vote. I know, right? It's a beautiful Monday morning. Yes, we're up bright and early. I'm Kayode Okikiolu. Yeah, we're counting down to the elections indeed, and it's a big one, as Chamberlain said. We'll be giving you lots of different angles to that one, because we want to ensure that we get it right this time around. At least make sure it's better than the previous ones we've had. And another sector where we've been trying to ensure we get things right in Nigeria is the transport sector, particularly that rail corridor. I mean, there's been lots to celebrate, I must say, in that rail sector. Yeah. But there's also been lots of
concerns.
Major concerns. I mean, we can't tell you enough about what happened last year, the Abuja-Kaduna rail corridor, the attack on the train, passengers were killed, tens of them abducted. Thankfully, they've been released after months. And then just some weeks ago, we saw what happened at Igweben train station, you know, where some intended passengers were kidnapped. They've also been released. And yesterday, we got another report from that same corridor, the Warri-Itakpe rail corridor, that there was a derailment of a train around 12:30 just yesterday, the 22nd of January. And there you see the derailment that happened. Lots of passengers were stranded, and it got a lot of people thinking, thank God, at least I'm safe, because we're told that there was no fatality and no casualty. But the questions naturally will then arise. What exactly happened? How did we have a train derail? This Warri-Itakpe corridor has been on since, what, 2019 or thereabouts. And if not for the recent abduction we had and now this derailment, a lot of people didn't even know that the train was in operation, especially around that corridor from Kogi through Benin or Edo State, then to what is it? Is it Delta now?
Yeah,
I imagine.
They're just servicing that environment and hoping that it will link to others.
Exactly.
In the
so if not for this, a lot of people would not have known. So first is, what exactly caused this? Because it looks like, I mean, there's been some sad story coming from the rail sector. And don't forget how much investment has been put in all of this. We need to ensure that it is up and running efficiently, effectively, such that, one, we can serve the people first off. That's the most important thing. Serve the people to do their business and ensure that there's a lot of economic activity around there. And of course, make money. But if we begin to have all of these, you know, kidnapping stories, derailment, first, as I said, we're not exactly sure, and the statement which was put out says the cause is not known just yet, has not been determined. But we need to ensure that we protect this with all that we can, because it's not just a huge revenue, or at least it's meant to generate revenue. It's also meant to ensure that there's business activities going on easily, such that we can improve our economy. The rail is very important, but thankfully there was no casualty or fatality, so at least we can be thankful for that. The question also then will be, how soon would we ensure that this particular corridor, that train, the coaches and all of that are back in operation? Because it's the start of a new week and people need to do business.
Well, of course, the service has said what we expect them to say, which is that services will resume as soon as possible. Find out, and of course, whatever investigation is to be. But I think for me, you know, Chamberlain, Kayode, one of the things I always look at is for us to know that this belongs to us. It doesn't belong to government. This scene that you're looking at on your screen is not something we should be seeing.
Yeah.
It's not, I mean, it's like, I don't even know how to describe it, Kayode. I mean, it's not just like it just derailed off just for, like, I mean, just look at the
like
distance.
A few centimeters, or no, it's actually a lot of meters.
Look at that distance. So it speaks to a lot. Now, I expect that with the experience that, you know, the personnel of the NRC have, the needful will be done within the shortest possible time. But I think it is important for us as a people to understand that we own this. it belongs to Nigerians. Look, trains are not just for carrying people.
Yeah.
It's also for ferrying cargo. This is the reason why you have, this particular facility close to the ports in Lagos, and it's hoping that it would transport stuff all over the different parts of the country, for which reason it was also extended to the south and southeast and on and on and on like that to go to the north as far as Kano and the rest. So we own this, and it will do us a world of good. Just imagine that this rail system functions well enough, and imagine the cost it will save on the roads, the cost of the product at the end of the day. I understand it's going to be some business concern for truck owners and the rest of it, but the larger economy is going to benefit. Can we have some kind of orientation for our people to let us know that we own this and we need to protect it? Because it goes through a community.
Absolutely.
And if it's, my apologies, Kade, if this was some form of vandalism executed by people, who are these people? As you said, I mean, we don't know what the reasons are yet, but if we haven't had a derailment of significant proportion along the Abuja-Kaduna road, Lagos-Ibadan, we haven't had any such, why this one? And just as about the time we just recently spoke about the fact that some people were abducted before they boarded, what are the objectives? All kinds of theories are going to come up, but we own this, and we have to take ownership of it. Want to add a word?
Well, I'm just looking at the passengers and I'm thinking, what's going through their minds?
Exactly.
I mean, thank God there were security agencies there, because, I mean, it could have escalated beyond that. So lots of things to be honestly grateful for, we must say, but we need to ensure that this does not happen again. Chamberlain.
You know, guys, there's just so much going on with this one. Much as we're supposed to thank God there were security agencies, but can we wholeheartedly actually be of that mindset? Look, I say this because, for instance, now this is a reported case of derailment. And by the way, guys, before the Abuja-Kaduna incident, remember before that time, there had been several scenarios, and we just thought, look, these things are not happening in isolation. These are just part of the bigger picture. I don't know why, okay, maybe it doesn't come across that way, but it just appears as though we don't always look at the big picture in this country when certain things happen, particularly from security agencies' perspective. If they do, or maybe because they've not communicated that to a lot of people, and that's why people perhaps may be of this mindset. By that I mean, when you remember you had some time ago, the cows stopped the train, there was an accident, they hit some cows, and then there was another scenario involving sudden stoppage of that train from Abuja to Kaduna. And we suspected some persons were just testing the grounds. Not long after that one, the kidnap happened. They showed that they could intercept that train in transit at that point. Now we've had that of Igwebe, and then you've got this one. So, because at this stage, look, you just have to suspect everybody. Look, with due respect as well, even security agencies. And this is, having seen several reports of the kind of things that have happened. Now, all of these passengers which you see here, the way, when you see this kind of narrative, if you initially wanted to use that service in any part of the country, you will think twice. You will. You just ask yourself, wait a minute, what am I going to face now? Even though the authorities tell us one thing, but the result of what we see out there is a different kettle of fish entirely. And speaking about security, that scenario in Igwebe, much as thankfully they're all out, because the narrative of what actually transpired, many don't actually have all the full details. So state governors have a huge role to play here. Because when we say they should go ahead and fence the rail tracks, if they go ahead and fence those rail tracks, which may not be a bad idea, don't forget, the scenario in Igwebe was that they were waiting at the train station and then they kidnapped them. Because if you do fencing of those tracks, what about those who are approaching? So that is where state governors have a role to play. They have to ensure, because I think some states have said they're doing it, providing constant security checks back and forth, ensuring that travelers are consistently protected from certain points up until the road track. So it's a combination of factors. We can't all leave the entire thing to the center to decide. The states have got a huge role to play here. And in this particular case, guys, we just need to look ahead and be sure that somebody somewhere is not testing the ground to see if I could derail this one here. Okay, so it means we could look for another scenario, do the same thing, and then get away with it. Well, who knows? It's not aimed at discouraging anybody. It's just to ensure that our security agencies think and look at the big picture beyond what we see now. And we just do hope and pray that at the end of the day, all of those passengers will be safe. So, well, we'll just be back with you in just a moment and take a look at some of the dailies here today. All right, welcome back. Let's take you through some of the dailies. We'll start with Abuja Inquirer. Yeah, new Naira notes. That concerns everybody, actually. Anxiety as deadline looms. Abuja residents lament lack of new notes. CBN faces litigations. CASA. Apex Bank to review policy ascribed to sources. So they're already going on with this anyways, even though with even for those who have the notes already, they see certain defects that they're not used to, some errors, and they feel, oh, wait a minute, was this done in a hurry? And then the way the cuttings were done, the positioning of the imagery on the notes, they just thought, oh boy, how are we going to go on with this one? Doesn't it give counterfeiters some oomph or impetus to try something? Because ordinarily, if you had seen those kind of notes that were not in good shape, you'd have thought, ah, this is fake. But at this moment, can you actually say that? Much as CBN kept on accusing, or they did accuse some banks of frustrating the entire thing, who knows? Who knows? And one of the latest is that I think one of the governors is calling for an extension of the deadline. And I thought, wait a minute, well, Mr. Governor, what have you been doing all this while? I mean, I thought even if you travel, you should have been notified a long time ago. Or maybe they'll tell you, oh, better late than never concerning those new news. But it is what it is here today. And you know, guys, we started out talking about the elections, but let me look at this one. NDLEA seizes 1.7 million tramadol pills in Lagos. Lagosians, do you know somebody who uses this? Please look out and be sure that everybody's safe on this one. There's several things here, really, from the VIO, who we always, many people always lambast about how they do the job, to that of the US, who says sponsors of violence will be denied visa. There you go. And then 2023, FCTA tasked residents on PVC collection. Go get yours now. Aqua is here as well.
Good morning, Chairman. I was trying my best not to cough in air. Good morning. Just to quickly take a look at Daily Trust newspapers for you this morning, and a very interesting headline they have. High costs hinder consumers' access to electricity meters. That's a lead story here. Only 38% of 12.6 million registered customers have meters. We were given second-hand meters with accumulated bills. That's according to a respondent, and that's a pretty serious allegation, and I would believe a grievous offense for someone to be able to give a customer second-hand meter with accumulated bills. That means it's not a prepaid meter, because
That should be a crime.
because prepaid meters don't come with bills.
That's criminal.
Yeah, it is criminal. It is criminal. Experts push for free meters. NERC says soon. There's been plenty of flip-flops on this particular meter business, meter policy. 1 minute we're told, oh no, consumers are not supposed to pay for meters. Next minute they say, okay, you know what, we'll bring our map, you can pay, and then we'll deduct it from your bills. The next minute, we don't even know what policy we're on, to be very honest. What we know is that some people are paying outrightly for their meters, which they say is supposed to belong to the discos. So you buy a meter, but it's not your own, it belongs.
Well, some time ago, they'll tell you we're not aware of this. So now, okay, at least they know they're aware of something. Right now.
NERC, please kindly follow the story on the front page of Daily Trust this morning. Look at this story, pretty serious one. Diphtheria death toll hits 34. Kano records 100 infections. This is something that's been making the rounds in Kano, and it's taken quite a number of lives. We started seeing this from last week, and it's continuing into the week. NCDC, not NSCDC. NCDC has waded into the matter, and they're keeping their eyes on what is happening in Kano. Hopefully, we won't go past that, and they'll be able to contain it and also manage the situation. Look at this, flight delays, theft, top list as aviation ranks third in FCCPC 2022 complaints. 148 passengers and hurt as Itakpe-Warri train derails. That has already been spoken about. And of course, how can I ignore the picture? It's too obvious to be ignored. How did you do this weekend? How did you fare this weekend? Were you able to get petrol? That's to our viewers. If you were, let us know what your experience was in the comments using any of the handles that will pop up on your screen. That's it for Daily Trust newspapers.
I sure qualify as a viewer, so let me just tell you how my experience was. I bought fuel for close to 300 Naira.
Whoa.
I queued. And then we need to talk about the behavior of a lot of Nigerians at filling stations, really. I think it even makes a bad situation worse, the way people conduct themselves. And so let me switch from viewer to an anchor now. Let's go to the New Telegraph, all right? The New Telegraph newspaper. You're viewers. Aren't you all viewers? Well, the New Telegraph is next. But let us know your experience, really. And this is the big lead on the front page of the New Telegraph. Corruption, other allegations, PDP fights back. Yeah, politics is big as well. You'd expect that at least some sort of maybe pro bono or act in good faith, the politicians will rally around and say, well, this is what we need to do to end this scarcity, and then we'll face our campaigns back. But the writers wants Tinubu arrested for corruption, urges Buhari to sack Keyamo for abuse of office. You lack character to be president, Tinubu tells Atiku. Stop verbal, physical violence, Afenifere pleads, urges parties, candidates to focus on issues. Ex-IGP Arase recommends stricter penalties for electoral violence. So yeah, that's in the build-up to the coming presidential elections, and of course spills over to March, where you have the governorship elections as well. There's this one for you. Electricity consumers fret over increased tariffs, reduced supply. Yeah, you can say that again. And second-hand meters. Wow, you hear lots of things these days.
Definitely not something to gloss over.
Honestly.
And you know, many of these things we okay, it's just one of those things and then we move on. It's just one of those things and then we move on, and it does not stop. You know, I keep going back to the fact that the engine of government is civil service. And if, as one of the presidential candidates said, if the engine has knocked, we should be looking for a mechanic, not a driver. But hey, we'll be back. I
So,
don't know.
NERC, again, we ask that these issues be resolved. A couple of more stories on the front page, really, but let's leave it there for a new Telegraph.
This Nigeria newspaper has on its front page, G5 governors, PDP battle enters decisive week. As the lead of this Nigeria newspaper today. Bated breath as Wike others set to name preferred presidential candidates. Plenty water has passed under the bridge, so reconciliation is almost impossible. That's described to a source. Opposition party plots new strategy if the worst happens. Find the details of that on page 2. Of course, that issue we talked about earlier, I mean, this is definitely scary. That picture on the front page, I don't even know how to put it. But right under that one, terrorism spreading to southern Nigeria through north central, research experts lament, urge security to deploy extermination strategy, not hit and run approach. But right beside the nameplate is an interesting story with a picture. I haven't seen that in a while. Prices of bread will keep rising. That's ascribed to bakers. And right beside it is a picture of sliced bread.
Okay, it's a breakfast show.
Well,
we can organize that.
I'm not fasting today.
That's a way. Oh, brilliant. I love that.
That story is on page 20 this morning. That's this Nigeria today.
Oh boy. I would have been asking AY, what's doing you this morning? What is it with that bread? You want to tease people with the bread? Okay, take a look at New Telegraph then. 2023 presidency. Fake news won't stop Tinubu APC. Yaya Bello declares. Denies withdrawing support for Asiwaju rivalry with Faleke. BNB leads APC presidential campaign to Bauchi today. So that is the lead one right here today. Despite renewed peace commitment, political parties continue mudslinging. So that is what you do not want to see. All of those times they go there and make a show of it. It should count for something. It should count for something. And you know, maybe you might add this. Look, when they sign this peace accord and then they do something else, it speaks a lot about the character of the persons in question. So if they're all there in the full glare of everyone, you and I, the electorate, and then when they sign, actually put pen to paper saying their word should be their bond, then when they come back and do something else, it tells you what they may likely do when you elect them. Even though they promise you one thing, clearly, because that's clearly what they've done before. It tells you what is coming. It's in their character. I mean, don't they say that a leopard doesn't change its spots overnight like that? So, I guess a word is enough for the wise. A word is enough for the electorate in this case. You never can tell. Well, you've got, Kwankwaso seems to has a lot of demons to fight. Look at this. 2023, Kwankwaso will not step down for anyone, NNPP. And the news is just all over the place about him stepping down. All the time, him stepping down.
All the time, especially now that, you know, there was news that some people, a faction of his party, has endorsed a candidate, a major candidate in the elections. And they're saying they're urging him to do same. So we'll see how that goes. Only if you will, if you won't, only time will tell.
But I know this is politics, and look, they'll tell you it's a game of interest. He may not have stepped down now. What if he steps down tomorrow?
That's what I said. Only time will tell, you know? They still have a few days.
It's just that people will not be surprised.
So
Expect the unexpected.
What if he doesn't step down?
Then it's also expect anything. That would be unexpected for those who thought he would step down.
The Daily Times is next here. Look at what they have. Jagaban Army. That's the, yes, Jagaban Army is a story there. It says, summon National Security Council meeting. PDP tasks Buhari. So they're concerned about that story, Jagaban Army. So maybe the name of the support group, if it is a support group, is it a militia? I don't know. But the PDP is concerned enough to ask the National Security Council to meet. That is their urging to President Buhari. Wants president to sack Keyamo for using public office to intimidate government agencies. Atiku unfit to be president. His men have lost their minds. That's according to the APC. Is this about issues as well? Is this when we say issues-based campaign? Is this what it is?
Honestly, one wonders. One just wonders. I mean, because this.
Will this qualify as issues-based campaign?
It's going to be like a borderline.
Okay.
It will be a borderline because when we hear from them, they can interrogate it and find out why do they think it is, for those who may think it is.
Well, I think it'll be worth asking some respondents.
But for the electorate, look, it is how do they plan or how will their policies change or improve the lives of the electorate? So for the electorate who's looking into that, I don't think this is an issue for them. It's not one of those issues that they like to hear. For them, this would just be one of those political things, you know, themselves.
Well, you decide where you fall. You can tell us if you think that this falls under issues-based campaign. Let us know what your thoughts are. Do this constitute issues? Some people will say maybe it does because abuse of office is a serious offense. But where do you draw the line? Are you saying that government ministers cannot campaign? Would that be abuse of office? I do know that in this administration, some governments, and I say that in plural, because it wasn't just at the federal level, the moment you wanted to run for office, you were asked to step down from your position. And, you know, some state governments also enforce that as well.
Yeah.
But, you know, when a party now decides to run, are government ministers allowed to campaign? In what manner are they allowed to campaign? So some people will say that may constitute an issue for them.
For that, I mean, I thought that was referring to the mudslinging between them, as per saying this person has lost his mind, this person has this against him.
Yeah.
It's not part of the campaign promises that the electors are looking for. So all of those things, if it has to do with public funds, of course, anybody, members of the public can ask questions about public funds.
Indeed.
Because it is public funds, not personal funds. And so
this isn't really about funds. This is about using public office to intimidate government agencies.
Public office is funded.
That's the allegation. So let us see how things eventually play out. You find details here on page 2 of the paper. Look at this. Polls, customs on high alert to intercept military camouflage ammunition. Okay. So customs had better stay on high alert because, I mean, this will be totally unacceptable were they to make their way into the country. I sincerely hope not. Plans to strip AMAC of constitutionally awarded revenues uncovered. Okay, that is also there as well. And looks like Daily Times has a new board chairman and ombudsman. Julius Eto is his name. Let's leave it there for the Daily Times newspapers.
Well, The Guardian is next with this one. Now, the picture on the front page of The Guardian is a delight to any ATM customer, if I could use that term. If you approach the ATM and you see this picture, it's something good. And it shows an ATM that has just dispensed lots of cash. But the big story, yes, it's on new banknotes. Cash swap program takes off nationwide, 1 week to deadline. Banks yet to heed CBN's directive, stock ATMs with old banknotes. This is what, how many days now? Just about 7, 8, 9 days to the deadline. Buni begs for extension, says only 4 out of 7 councils have banks in Yobe. Zulum decries non-dispensing of new Naira notes in Borno. No cause for alarm over deadline, CBN says. New notes surface in Anambra banks after threats by CBN. So it looks like these notes are there somewhere, or at least somewhere there, and they need to come out. So who's holding them back?
Yeah, I like the position of the CBN last week. When they give you old notes, reject. So if for whatever reason you get new old notes at your ATM, just go into the banking hall.
And deposit it.
and tell them you don't want.
But think about the time. Most people don't
Yeah,
go to get money for fashion.
I know.
They need to do business.
I agree with
Pay
you.
for some bill.
I know.
Emergency.
I know. But you see, we've been hurrying to do things all these years, all these decades, down through our history. What has that brought us? So sometimes a little sacrifice here and there. Not everyone that will be able to do that, right? But if one or two persons make that example,
And it sends a message on.
yes, I think the banks will get the message.
But I like that image on the front page. I just need to say that again. A couple more stories. Experts predict improved performance in second half of the year ahead of MPC meeting. Yes, the CBN governor has busy days ahead. Let's leave you there for the Guardian newspaper.
Well, the picture on the front page of the Nigerian Tribune isn't something to cheer. It's not the kind of thing that we want to see, albeit you would say, okay, maybe it's something humane from the persons involved, you know, but then, of course, that will come up shortly. Nigerian Tribune has this one as a lead story. Afenifere to politicians, stop verbal physical violence. Story is on page 3. It just raises a question in your mind. Don't the politicians look at the laws? But anyway, that's what the lead story
Very
of
good question.
of the Nigerian Tribune today, and that picture is of the governor of Benue State visiting victims of latest bandit attacks in the state. But right under that picture, you see Warri Itakwe train derails in Kogi forests. 148 passengers safely conveyed to destination. Find the details on the inside pages. About the nameplate, redesigned Naira, CBN launches cash swap program for rural dwellers. What does that mean? Find the details of that on page 6 of the paper. Is that a way of the CBN attempting to address the issues raised, you know? But then, that's the lead of the story this morning, and several other stories right on the front page of the paper, which give you an...
This is what they call 21st century. When my customer say I want to use POS, I will just bring out my phone, open the application, press this code. I don't have anyone that using POS anymore.
There's always a lot of issues to look at, especially when you are building up to what some officials of INEC call the mother of all elections. The first of it in a long time, some of them say. But, you know, which has some of the issues? Which of these issues would you consider the most crucial, most important, beside the PVCs and even the electoral process itself? Where are we lacking? What must we do to make sure that this election has the integrity Nigerians desire, that there will be no rancor at the end of the day? To have a look at this and several other issues this morning, we have Dr. Tunji Abayomi, who is a human rights activist, as well as Pro-Chancellor and Chairman Governing Council at Adekunle Ajasin University. He joins us here in the studio. Thank you so much for joining us today.
Thank you for inviting me.
Well, INEC is preparing. Nigerians are preparing, political parties are preparing, civil society organizations are preparing, election observers are preparing.
And the world is watching.
And the world is watching. You know, but of all the issues that are coming up, one that's becoming a little more concerning for INEC, beside the issue of insecurity, is that of fake news. In fact, I read a report. We'll get to that report, but how significant is this for you? Because one of the reports that INEC put out, for instance, said that they saw a report, a press release that says, this is from INEC, and they looked at it. It was the signature of the INEC official that normally signs and all these things, but at the end of the day it says, this is my signature, but it was not me. I didn't put this out. So how do we combat fake news at in the process of such an election as important as this in Nigeria?
Well, I think the dialogue, the type of dialogue we're engaging in here would help in the process. But the truth of the matter is that the tremendous access to social media, and I will call it the revolutionary transformation of communication. Without, you're talking of access without borders, so to say, may make it largely impossible, because sometimes you see news either on Facebook, internet, originating from sources unknown and accredited to individuals. So the uncontrolled access to social media, social platform will make it impossible. And it's a difficult situation because at one end you're worried about fake news, but at the other hand, you also have to be concerned about freedom of speech, which obviously is essential for democracy. So it's a sort of a balance. Really don't know. There's no magic, you know, to control it as far as I can see.
Who will sermonize for who now? That's probably one of the questions that should be asked, because of course, you know very well that the federal government has been doing what it can to at least educate people, sensitize people about the fact that we need to control what we put out in the name of information. And of course, because of that, people put out all kinds of things. But then there is also this dilemma of freedom of speech, not being hindered by clamping down and all of that. But then the laws are not silent on slander, on libel, and all of those things. You said it's a balance. The laws are clear, but then sometimes enforcing those laws can be such a challenge as well, because on the one hand is freedom of speech, on the other hand is fake information being put out. Who will champion any of the laws against slander or libel in such a case?
It's a difficult issue because slander, libel, and so on and so forth are remedies against individual threat to reputation. You can't really exercise such rights against public institutions. I think the presumption of law and the liberty that is granted to freedom of speech is that at the end of it, it will regulate itself in the marketplace of ideas. That at a point, good ideas, good thoughts, valuable and correct information will knock off wrong information in the marketplace. That's the whole idea of public space.
But some damage could have been done before that.
Well, the presumption is that there will be no damage, because if you come out and you say, for example, Tunji Abayomi is Dada Ajayi, something will turn around, somebody will come up, maybe he himself will rise up and say, no, I'm not Dada Ajayi, I'm Tunji Abayomi. And so eventually the balance will be such that the pendulum will tilt in favor of truth instead of falsehood. Because the difficulty of regulating freedom of speech is the consequence would be to deny it. If we were to regulate and control negative speech, the effect may be to deny a right that is essential, not only to human relationship, but also to the issues that concern governance. So that's the delicacy, that is involved.
And I think it's an interesting angle you bring to this, because for some, prevention is better than trying to cure it or trying to manage it when it has happened. So that's why a lot of people think people that should know better perhaps should be the ones to champion this and not be the ones caught in that. And I'm talking about politicians now. And it brings me to this point, because over the past couple of days now, it looks like the closer we get to elections, the more intriguing things get. We've seen the parties, some of them engaging in the brickbats. I mean, it's something you usually expect. It's a political season. But when we have clamored for issue-based campaigns, there's been a first phase of the peace accord signed, and all the candidates said that, we're going to abide by this peace accord. You'd at least expect that things will be different and issues will be focused upon. But then what we have seen is quite different. And as a politician, if I can call you that as well, I'd like you to speak to this. And I'll talk about the one, because I want us to be specific so we can deal with them. The one between the APC and the PDP. The APC has had its fair share calling on, the prosecution of the PDP's candidate. The PDP just recently said, well, it's the APC's candidate that should actually be arrested and prosecuted, and they gave reasons. But before we get into them, I want us to step back, and I'd like you to maybe speak to this. Do you think we're getting anywhere with all of this? Should Nigerians take it serious or just relegate it to the usual brickbats, politicking? Are these issues?
I don't consider them to be issues. If we watch the debate, even, for example, among presidents, I was just watching a debate between Barack Obama and the conservative Republican candidate. The Republican candidate was making assertions that are clearly false. And Obama came and said, but everything he said is untrue, is false, and so on and so forth. It's almost impossible to avoid this type of confrontation, rightly or wrongly. But all of that will soon be resolved. I think Nigerians, people should simply disregard that and focus on the serious issue of voting for the next government, because this nation really needs, I would say, the faithful choice of the people to raise it up. And I think the most essential, and we are talking of the mother of all the election, because in my view, the most fundamental choice for this nation is that this nation must simply rise out of poverty. The whole thing that we are seeing is sort of what I would call the tendency towards utopian aspiration, which is evolving among the youths, essentially confirms dissatisfaction, the prevailing order. I mean, you can see it follows generation of struggle among peoples of the world, whether you are talking of 1789 French Revolution, or you are talking of 1917 Russian Revolution, or you are talking of 2010, 2011 Arab Spring, or you go even up to 2019 Ecuador, and so on and so forth. There is a very deep dissatisfaction with the prevailing order. And what do we need in place of this dissatisfaction? I think that should be what should preoccupy our people.
But sir, the issues raised, they also have to do with the integrity of the candidates. Yes, we cannot get the perfect state, but I think the goal is to at least strive towards something near perfect, or at least something that is devoid of all of the things we've experienced in the past. Yes. So when you hear SPV for corruption allegations from the APC to the PDP, and the PDP says, well, your candidate has been involved in drugs, cornering states' funds, and all of that. Right. These are issues that, yes, you might say that maybe the electorate should put it aside and focus on the issues. But the electorate will think, so this person I thought I wanted to vote for, or at least I chose to vote for, what if the person turns out to be someone who will topple government because of the track records that these people have alleged, the integrity issues? So the question is, in the light of those integrity-based issues, or at least issues that question integrity, shouldn't the electorate still think these are issues as well?
Well, there are issues in order to make personal choice. But we are not in heaven. We must also appreciate that. We are in the world, and it will be presumptuous, because the tendency of utopian aspiration, at the end of it achieves very little. If you study the history of uprisings in the world, if you look at, for example, the Arab Spring, what has happened, people say, oh, okay, yes, most of it is because of reaction to poverty, reaction to corruption, and so on and so forth. But only sinful men will bring a society, will raise the society. Because the problem of the society are the sins, and they understand the value of those sins and the effect.
Please say that again. Only sinful
men will raise the society from sin, because they understand what the effect of the sin, the consequences, the structure of sin, and how to manage them. If you are looking for holy men, you are not going to achieve a whole lot. If you look at the history of the world, that's just the reality. So in our nation...
But my apologies, sir.
Yes.
Is that to say that those integrity issues do not matter, particularly if one way or the other, they do not line up with the aspirations of Section 23 of the Constitution?
Well, no, integrity issue matter, but it's to a certain extent. The Constitution speaks of against corruption, against this, and so on and so forth.
Yes.
Obviously, we'll deal with that. But to expect that personal holiness of candidate, a man that has gone through the structure of life in this nation, a nation, anywhere in the world, for example, you find that politicians are sinners. For example, you cannot run politics, you cannot run office without money. Money is the root of all evils, quote unquote. Or somebody says the absence of it is actually the very fundamental root of problems. You understand? So what I'm in essence saying is that there will be some form of balance. Yes, there will be a sinner, but not a murderer, if we understand what I mean. So we must understand that.
Now, Dr. Abhamid, you know, I mean, you spoke about balance the other time, so let's see if it is possible. You are talking about issues that are important, germane to the Nigerian. You mentioned poverty in particular.
Yes.
And a significant number of people will look at unemployment, homelessness, deprivation, rural development, literally stagnated and all of that as issues.
Yes.
But then there are some of these people who have been in the circle, in various circles of influence over the years for long enough to have been able to do one thing or the other about it. Yet nothing significant has been achieved by any of them, perhaps by way of influencing the governors or influencing anyone in any office to be able to do some of these things. So if you are saying it's the sinner that knows the path to sin and can cut it, but then the things that the sins have caused have inflicted a lot more pain on people, why not look for someone who has a semblance of what you call holiness? There will be that argument, wouldn't you say? So that at least, okay, we know that these ones are grievous sinners, but how about this one? Well, he's not perfect, but he's not as sinful as these ones. That's the utopian that you probably are talking about, that the young people seem to be
Somebody
chasing.
was saying yesterday that, I think it was in Mexico, that they were looking for the best economists, so they went to Harvard, and they took some of the best minds to some of the leading institutions, PhD in this, in economics, with the hope that they would transform the economy. At the end of it, they made the economy considerably worse. The truth of the matter is that, in my view, this nation needs a man, what I call with ancient wisdom, in order to help this nation, not necessarily a holy man. Now, you have to ask yourself, what really is the fundamental concern, neurosis of our nation with the greatness? This nation, with the fecundity, the capacity and stature of a citizen, should be one of the greatest nations in the world. So what's the problem? The principal issue for now, and each generation, each period in human history, they have their own challenges. The challenge this nation faces today, and the foundation of most of the neuroses and the crisis, is poverty. So you now have to ask yourself, of the people that are running, who can create wealth for this nation? Who can rise to the challenge of poverty. Look, I think it was one of the Russian presidents who said a nation is worthy when it has worthy people.
But Dr. Bayami, on that,
yes,
you don't think leadership is a more significant problem than poverty? Because there are those who would say, if we had the right leadership, we wouldn't have poverty.
Yes, no, leadership is significant because it is leadership is more significant than poverty because it is leadership that will transform our poverty to wealth and change, you know, the stature, the tragedy that we face. But what I'm in essence saying is that our preoccupation now is not whether the man is has one wife instead of, or maybe 5, or that the man smokes marijuana, you know, instead of, going to church. Or no. So what I'm in essence saying is that we must be practical, sensible, and face the challenge of this time. The challenge of this time is not holiness, I'm sorry to say. What we need in this nation is a sinner who can develop us, as far as I'm concerned, who can give us, who can create wealth for this nation. At any rate, if we look at all of us, I think the Bible says if we were to count sin, who will stand? If I may just ask it. So sometimes we pay too much attention to what I call meta-legal factors instead of focusing on the larger issue that will essential.
Certainly, your views will be quite interesting. I mean, yes. Let us know what you think, and I'm talking to our viewers. Let's know what you think about this, because it's a new kind of thinking. Perhaps that's what a lot of politicians even think about, but they've never really come out to say it. So it's interesting that you're breaking the ice here. But then the concern will be, this is not to shoot down the idea. I think it's important for ideas to contend, and we'll come up with something. But the concern will be, we have a constitution. We have laws that prescribe punishment for sins.
Yes.
And never have I seen in any of those laws that the reward for sin is to elect or to get elected into office. The rewards or the punishment for sin in that context is well spelled out. For corruption, it is spelled out. For this, it is spelled out. So if we now elect a sinner, as you said, and I think it's a very interesting conversation, but if we elect a sinner, the challenge then is that you're sending a message to the people that, man, it's okay to be a sinner. In fact, if you're a sinner, you get a reward, which is to become possible leader at certain levels. So aren't you concerned that with this kind of thinking, we're breeding a situation where sin is now permissible, in spite of the laws we have, which frown against sin?
Well, first of all, let's understand something. Even within the law, sin is permissible.
Interesting.
For example, let me explain to you. How many people, first of all, the government will decide who to prosecute. There are lots of sinners. The government cannot prosecute all sinners. It will now choose, okay, it's A I want to prosecute, while B, who is also a sinner, is free. So there's really no perfect system. That's the first issue. The second issue is that there is also legal process to control some of these issues. For example, a president can be impeached if the National Assembly is serious and is doing its work, if the president gross misconduct. That's for the purposes of the Constitution. That's the greatest sin, gross misconduct, which is actually defined by the National Assembly. Then the president can be impeached. So all of that is already ingrained in the Constitution. So, but if we now are talking of election, and then we spend all our time looking for a holy man, where are we going to find the holy man? We're not going to find him.
Are you by any ways or by any means dichotomizing sin from offense or breaking the law? Are you saying breaking a law is different from sinning?
Yes, breaking the law is different from sin. When I'm talking of sin, I'm talking of personal morality, which is what we focus on so much in this election. Nobody, for example, is saying that, oh, you've broken this law in this something, and so on and so, you need to be, and so on and so. We focus too much on personal morality when we are talking of electability of individuals for office. In terms of breaking the law, obviously, you are disqualified by law, legal standard, not by the standard of morality of the people. So it's important for us to appreciate that.
Right. So how do you then expect a person with warped morals, an immoral person, to build a nation without the person engaging in corruption? Because, I mean, these things add up. An immoral person, someone who permits this, permits that. As you've said, sin is not entirely, I mean, you even said the laws permit sin in some context. So how do you expect an immoral person to be a leader, someone that people look up to? In fact, they've said that when you even have someone who frowns against corruption, the system fights that person. So imagine someone who is immoral. The system that wants to be corrupt says, oh, fantastic, it's an all-for-all affair. So don't you worry that an immoral person will then breed multiplication of immorality and topple the government or the nation?
Well, first of all, the question of the standard of morality is actually an issue for the people. And that is, the people are already given the chance to determine that standard by their elections, by their votes. You know, by their vote, they decide that, look, we don't want this person, we want this person, and so on and so on. That's number one. If peradventure you then elect him, first of all, even the issue of that is essentially judgmental. Because in large measure, what you consider immoral may be, for example, considered moral. In this nation, for example, there are churches that say, if you have 2 wives, you can't come to the church. For them, that is their morality. On the other hand, there are other churches that said, no, you can marry as many wives and so on and so forth. That's the first thing. So sometimes this is judgmental. This is not to say that a leader must not have values that are essential values that are vital for leadership. Concern for the people, compassion. If you read Pedagogy of the Oppressed, by this famous Paulo Freire, who is considered the philosophy of change, this Brazilian philosopher. You know, he talks of he talks of activism, that we should be careful of activism that focuses on utopian tendencies. You know, because we are in a real world. You know what I mean. Change is not going to bring, it's not going to come through morality. It will come through practicality.
That sounds a little, something that one should interrogate further, because as we mentioned earlier, the Constitution is clear on certain things. For instance, so Section 23 talks about national ethics. Section 24 talks about duties of the citizen. Perhaps we'll look at that in a little deeper context when we return from this break. Please stay with us. Thank you for staying with us. Dr. Tunji Abayomi is still with us here this morning. Well, Dr. Abayomi, as my colleague said, your perspective this morning is very interesting. But, we're talking about what the Constitution says and, talking about the laws and all, morals, ethics and all. Section 24 of the Constitution lists duties of the citizen. And the second one says that every citizen has the duty to help enhance the power, prestige, and good name of Nigeria. C says, respect the dignity of other citizens and the rights and legitimate interests of others. On and on and on like that. Let's pay a little attention to that second one, help enhance the power, prestige, and good name of Nigeria. How does a sinner help us enhance the power, prestige, and good name of Nigeria?
By reducing his sins instead of enhancing his sins.
So he's a certified sinner.
Yes, well.
Shouldn't he go answer to those sins rather than reduce it?
Instead of adding more and increasing it, making it bigger, he curtails it by the choices. Because we are all sinners. If we are not sinners, there will be no need for that prescription to begin with. It presumes that the citizens are sinners. the principal issue that I want us to, that I think we should focus on is what really is the greatest, in quote unquote, sin that we face. The greatest sin, I'm using it not from the moral standpoint, now from the practical reality of our nation. The greatest sin that we face in this nation is to reduce poverty. We need somebody who can make money and use money for our development. Because when you are in, I think it was in the Russian Knesset, they call it, that he said a hungry mouth does not understand the language of persuasion. When a man is denied he's hungry, sin means nothing. Morality means absolutely nothing.
That's Israel Knesset. That'll be Israel.
No, I'm sorry, not Russian parliament.
Oh, right.
It's not Knesset. Knesset is Israel.
Right. Okay.
Russian parliament, and they said a hungry mouth does not understand the language of persuasion. And then even the Bible says, do not make me so poor that I will curse you. Can you imagine the effect of poverty? Or so rich that I will forget you.
You know, Dr. Abayomi, there are those who would also wonder, isn't that same poverty that which has been weaponized against the people? But don't answer that one yet. My colleagues in Abuja have a question. Go ahead, Chamberlain.
Well, Dr. Abayomi, let's bring it back to lots of people just wondering where all of this is headed with the Cynthia and Saints. But in context of our present reality, now, the candidates, if you want to look at the leading candidates and several other candidates, and given how certain persons have taken their positions, the electorate. For instance, if you look at the position of former President Obasanjo and a lot of other young people who have gone ahead and endorsed their candidates. So in that context, would you say that they are performing their role, and rightly so, that fits into your description of who we need to do what you say to lead this country aright?
Well, you are talking about the endorsement, whether they are performing their role, if I understand you, Chamberlain, is that what you're saying?
Whether it counts for something, because you thought, I mean, you had a position on that matter some time ago.
Well, it counts for little, for something, but the smallest is next to nothing. You know, because the reality of the matter is that we all have our influence, constituency of influence, you know, so I do not know, it may be exciting, in my view, for the candidates, but for the voters and the electors, in my view, it counts very little, you know, that's my view, because President Obasanjo is a former president, but he has only one vote as the least Nigerian citizen in my town, Okeagbe. So, yes, you may have your own excitement in terms of, you know, supporting a particular candidate, but I don't think it counts very much, in my view.
Well, speaking about it counting for much or not from the perspective of the electorate, I mean, we've seen some skeleton in the cupboard, if you will, for the APC and the PDP, accusing themselves of one thing or the other, wanting security agencies to investigate. So, on the part of the electorate, do you think that all of these allegations makes it a lot more murky and perhaps clearer to other people why they shouldn't use any of these two and look the way of somebody else who, quote unquote, may be a breath of fresh air in the manner of speaking?
I think our people should consider all that irrelevant to the issues that confront the nation. It's an excitement, it's interesting, wow. It gingers our fascination about politicians and issues, but the principal issue should be the preoccupation with Nigeria. What should Nigeria be? Now, look, it was Machiavelli who said he wants to talk about how things are, not how they should be. But with our situation, we should be talking about how Nigeria should be, not how Nigeria is. We know how Nigeria is. We should be talking about how it should be. So if we want to talk about how Nigeria should be, Nigeria will be what we want it to be or how it should be when we do something about poverty. That is the foundation of the tragedy of this nation. So we should be looking for a man who can raise the wealth of this nation and use that wealth to develop us.
It doesn't matter if this man is said to have made his own wealth in a very crooked manner. Because I know you've talked about saints, but here we're talking, and sinners, here we're talking about the law. You're a lawyer and you understand how the law works. These are codes by which a country abides by. Now, if what we're talking about, and we're saying that what we desire is how our country should be, should we bring in people who have gone against the codes of the country, the laws of the country, and think that they can help us uphold the law when they get into office?
Well, we have already brought them up. We have candidates. They've gone through the processes, legal processes, societal processes, party processes, democratic processes, and they have emerged. What is left now is to look into the future. What's the future? Whosoever is elected is subject to certain controls, legal controls, that is imputed in the Constitution.
Apparently, this is not enough for your party. Professor Abayomi, this is not enough for your party because you say that what we have now are candidates. It was your party who started this issue of SPVs against former Vice President Atiku Abubakar and threatening the security agencies that if they refuse to prosecute, they are going to court. In fact, as we speak, we understand that the spokesperson, one of the spokespersons for your party, is suing the security agencies to ensure that they take former Vice President Atiku Abubakar to court. So if you say that we should look beyond that, but your party is the one now looking into closets and saying, you know, these candidates or one or two of these candidates have defects, can we really say that, you know, we've really moved past looking at the candidates for who they are?
Well, my point is that I'm not now focusing on my party. I mean, my party is politics, but the issue for us, people, that should be the preoccupation. I mean, naturally, in the context of politicking, all sorts of things will arise from the leadership of the party will accuse the other one, the one will accuse the other one, they keep abusing one another. It takes place in all the politics of the world, anywhere. All sorts of things arise, all sorts of accusations, fascinating and exciting. It makes politics interesting as far as I'm concerned. But the issue that should preoccupy us, serious-minded Nigerians, is why are we where we are now? What do we want Nigeria to be? Like I said, we should be thinking of how Nigeria should be. We know what it is now. And then ask our questions in deciding who to vote for, who can generate for this nation the required wealth to reduce poverty and improve us, to develop us, because you need wealth of a nation to develop a nation. The nations we respect are the wealthy nations. The nations that are in problem are poor nations. So that is the difference. So the mere fact that a political party is accusing the other one, so that should not be of any consequence. As far as I'm concerned, I don't even pay attention to that at all.
Dr. Abayomi, let me comment. I do know that, I mean, we've seen politics play out in many other countries. For instance, when President Obama was running, one of the accusations against him then was that he wasn't even American, that
yes.
Where he was born, you know, Hawaii, did not qualify to be a part of the United States.
Yes.
Those kinds of things, but people might argue. I mean, the politics, because people want to play on people's emotions. But these allegations that we're looking at in Nigeria border on the criminal, border on the very foundation of, you know, a new country that we say we want to build, or the type of country that we say we want to have. Can the electorate really close its eyes to the allegations that are flying right, middle, left, and center between the APC and the PDP?
But these allegations have been on for years. These men have gone through legal process for years. Issues have arisen. Investigations have been conducted in many cases, and so on and so forth. And we are preoccupied ourselves with what I call dead issues. I call it meta-legal issues with regard to the electability of appropriate person for the Nigeria of our dream. This is the point I'm making. I'm saying that we are focusing too much on what I would call issues that are not essential for the present preoccupation we have, which is to elect a president. And what type of president do we want to elect? I'm saying the president we should focus on, not a holy president, but a president, even if he's a sinner, that can transform this nation, maybe I would say, to holiness. And there's nothing impossible about that.
Dr. Abami, are you suggesting, or because people have the impression, it comes across to some people, that you're saying the candidate of the APC is unholy, but he can deliver Nigeria to what? Where we ought to be?
Is unholy. The candidate of PDP is unholy. Is the candidate of Labour holy? If you look at all of them, it's like I was telling your colleagues. President Obasanjo once told me that when he wanted to appoint the group managing director of NNPC, he looked at the record of all possible candidates. They were all corrupt. But he still had to appoint one of them. So he called the one he was...
What?
Yes. He looked at all of them. They were all
That's
corrupt.
A different scenario. Appointing a candidate and electing a candidate, I know you know that. But for instance now, when you say they've gone through the mill, they've gone through several investigations, perhaps you could remind us, has there been any investigation for the APC candidate over, because some of these things flying, where they say between January 2015 to January 28, 2015, that his Union Bank domiciliary account received cash payment in dollars totaling about $4 million from various SPVs. Has there been any investigation of this kind of matters?
That's just an
if you held them at all?
That's allegation. You understand what I mean? Before a man is...
Yeah, but should this kind of thing be investigated?
Anybody can investigate. Journalists can investigate it and so on and so on. But the point I'm making is that he is a candidate, and the presumption is that becoming a candidate, he's deserving and he's met legal conditions and constitutional prescriptions. So if you now go and spend all your time at this late hour talking about that, to my mind, is a bloody waste of time. What we should focus on now, if there are issues, when anybody gets into the office, the National Assembly is there to deal with the issue. So, but what I'm saying is that to preoccupy ourselves with all those meta-legal factors now, it's on seriousness, with due respect.
It appears as though you're saying that, let's just get this done. And then if they have issues, I mean, if indeed they were corrupt, and then we can sort that later.
Yes.
And I'm wondering, because you had started when we talked about, those brickbats, saying that, well, people can say anything. You don't try to prevent it. It would balance itself out. So it appears as though you're saying, yes, Nigerians acknowledge indeed that these people have, dodgy, issues around them, but still they should knowingly elect them. Don't you think that's fully doing what is wrong, even though you have the knowledge that it is wrong?
What's the option? That's the issue. Every single...
Well, there are 18 options.
Yes, that's what I'm saying. And I was given the example of President Obasanjo. He looked at all of them. They are all sinners, corrupt. He told me this personally. And so he looked at, he said, okay, this one is better than this. And then he called him and he said, you are a thief. And that one said, no, I'm not a thief. He said, you are corrupt. He said, I'm not. He said, shut up. I looked at your record. You are a thief, but you are a better thief than the other one. So what I'm in essence saying is, we look at all of them, we say, look, what is it that we need from these sinners? Who is of the sinners can give us the best possibility, having regard to the issue that confront this nation today?
Doctor, so let's look at least maybe the magnanimity or otherwise of these sins you mentioned. The PDP just recently spoke about your candidate and talked about, how his salary was $2,400, and just a few years after he had amassed $661,000 according to court documents, a certain account plus over $1 million, and then he had to forfeit $460,000 to the United States. I mean, those are records that are there. Yes. $460,000 to the United States government, and the spokesperson of his campaign had said that they were tax that he was meant to pay that he didn't pay, and then the banks deducted them. They had read questions about is that tax evasion or otherwise. But to the source, which a lot of people have asked, his history, his source. How did someone who was earning $2,400 some few years after amassed that much money? He has said in one interview that it was bonus. In another interview, he said that he inherited real estate. Do those questions, as a party man, do they bug you? Have you tried to find out that really, is it real estate? Is it bonus? Does it make sense?
No, they don't really. You see, the point is that we are always looking for the negative, which is okay for anybody that stands up for public office. But let me give you a simple, I trained in America as a lawyer. All the issue they're talking about, forfeiture is a very simple process. It's of no consequence at all. If you are involved in drug in America, there is simply no way you won't be prosecuted. I can tell you that categorically. The other thing is that forfeiture is a civil process, not a criminal process. Forfeiture. You are not, it is a process against property, not against a person. In the case of a criminal process, it will be a case against a person. And it will not go against his property until he's convicted. Let us understand that. So if the process is just against forfeiture, that's not a criminal process.
So are you convinced, which is the other leg of the question, on his source of wealth? Because at some point he had said bonuses from the work he was doing, and they had said that you were earning $2,400. How come you have the millions in your account? Just recently, he said that he inherited real estate, and there were questions about who did you inherit this from? Because in some documents or in some reports from the State Assembly when he was speaking, he had said that, well, I'm from a poor background. In fact, I had to drop out. Those were the documents quoted. So are you clear on his source of wealth, and are you convinced? That's the question.
The way we should look at issues is not to ask me to explain my source of wealth.
No, since you're a party person and you're supporting him,
I'm answering your question. You know, in Yoruba, they say, "Isale oro legbe." Now,
which means, for our non-Yoruba speaking audience,
well, for a non-Yoruba, there's a lot of dirtiness in the foundation of wealth, or wealth of any kind. But what you should be preoccupied with is, if you know that the source of my wealth is illegal, then it's your responsibility to find a way to deal with it. You know, if we were to ask all wealthy men in the world how they make their wealth, you will find a lot of revelations.
Doctor, you didn't answer my question. The question is, are you yourself convinced that the source of his wealth is explainable and it is clean?
I am very, very convinced.
How did you get convinced?
Well, I'm very convinced for the simple reason. Look at it from practical standpoint. A man who is a director, who rose to the point of director of mobile producing, is he stupid and will be running after simple issues? Well, the second thing is that, do you think that those organizations are so incompetent that they won't know have information and know about their staff?
Well, I guess at the end of the day, the decision is for Nigerians to decide which of, as you said, sinners they would appoint or elect into office or give the job of steering the affairs of their lives for the next 4 years. As Kawade said, there are 18 sinners.
Options. I didn't say sinners. Candidates. We need to be clear on that. Candidates.
Dr. Tijaba, we have to thank you very much for being here this morning. Human rights activist and pro-chancellor, Chairman, Governing Council at Adekunle Ajasin University in Ondo State. Thank you again.
Thank you for inviting me. I
There is more
appreciate it.
after this break. Please stay with us.
Welcome back to Sunrise Daily. We're focusing next on the economy. And Mr. Tokwe Fashua, an economist, joins us next to discuss that matter. Good morning. Thank you for coming.
Morning. How are you guys doing?
Well, we're doing good, but you know, for a lot of people, economy, in fact, they think economy should be the main subject matter, the main essence, the major determinant to elect who should lead this country for the next 4 years.
Yeah.
Well, the NASG came up with what they describe as the 2023 macroeconomic outlook. They're looking back to 2022, how it performed, and perhaps may guide as a way, template or a springboard to see what may likely happen, what we should expect, and how things may turn out. And there was this, in that huge report, there's this part that they looked at as though they called it the 6 themes that drove Nigeria's socio-economic narrative in 2022. Several of them, in no particular order. They say Nigeria faced a combination of cost push and demand pull inflationary pressure. Economic growth relapsed as the oil sector remained in contraction. Rising interest rates in the global markets dampened investors' confidence. Nigeria's external vulnerability was amplified despite favorable trade outcomes. Monetary policy tightens to curtail inflationary pressure, and then weak fiscal performance pushed the country closer to a fiscal cliff. What a 2022 we have. So for some of these things, they resonate with you, don't they?
They do. I mean, I think they're spot on. You can't fault that. You know, I think they basically have the grounds covered. But you know, I think the real linchpin there is the fiscal underperformance. Monetary policy did well and went into overdrive, as it were. As we all know, the monetary policy people, which is central bank, have done all they need to do and also made some incursion into the fiscal space with the interventions that they've done over time, for which many times they are criticized. However, you know, when inflation started inching up, 18%, 19%, went into the 20% region, the Monetary Policy Committee, which is housed under the central bank, had to begin a process of increasing interest rates. Till date, they've increased by about 450 basis points, which is 4.5%. And people are asking, you know, that itself can precipitate a recession. It has been seen in other jurisdictions to precipitate a recession when you increase interest rate with a view to slowing down inflation. Now, also, inflation hasn't quite slowed down, but for the last quarter, where we've seen about 0.14% reduction in inflation rate, perhaps we've now hit that inflection point, hopefully, where we'll now begin to see a trending down of inflation rate. I'm hoping this week, I think they're going to have another MPC's meeting. I'm hoping that they would hold rates and watch rather than continue to increase rate. Because again, continuing to increase rates makes life tougher for manufacturers, for borrowers in general. And of course, you want to, at some point, you know, open up the economy, you know, make it easier for people to borrow, create new business, and also create employment, you know. But the fiscal space is where the problem is, because you'd see the ministers of finance, you know, always complaining about how we have a revenue problem. But then what are you doing about it, you know? So getting the revenues up is a very difficult task. Oftentimes, I think you'd have to also approach the National Assembly to put a few laws in place, because no matter what policies you put in place, if it's not backed by law, it's not likely to fly. And of course, even if it flies, if you're able to get everybody around the table to agree and say, you know, I mean, we're talking about manufacturers associations and so on, but when it's not backed by law, the next administration is likely to reverse it, because it's always a competition of interest if you ask me. But I think that we have space in this country to grow that revenue. You know, I have even just one, if you like, killer app, if I could use that word, to grow revenue in this country. I think there's money. I mean, this morning I woke up and when I checked my Facebook, it was a friend who was sharing the news of a certain gentleman in Lagos who's celebrating his 50th with a 152 million Naira Lexus Jeep 2022 edition, whatever. You know, and you know, in Nigeria, we pay cash for those things. It's not like abroad where people have to pay a little bit and then they deduct money. We pay cash money. So, you know, there's cash flow, but it seems not to be flowing. Well, if you look at Nigeria, you know, most parts of Nigeria, we don't pay property taxes. We live in very lovely houses. Even if at all they ask us to pay 5,000 Naira per annum, people still resist. They say, are you the one that built my house for me? Are you the one that put the borehole? Yeah, all of those things are immaterial. The point is that we have to look for, government has to follow the money. And when you follow the money, you'll be able to get a little bit from there and use it for the deficit areas. And of course, government has to be responsible, a lot more responsible around the usage of these revenues that they're talking about.
Well, you talked about, you know, the fact that there is potential to up our revenues. And I think perhaps that will be the biggest challenge for the incoming government. But in the meantime, you know, we have so many leaks. Subsidy is a big conundrum that we're yet to really wrap our heads around. Is taking up so much of the little revenue that is coming into the country. And even as we speak, you know, the so-called petrol, which was supposed to be subsidizing, is very scarce. You know, so there is that one on the hand, and crude oil theft dealt us also a very big blow last year as well. Then we also saw ways and means. The fact that, you know, as a result of the underperformance in these areas, we're burrowing ourselves into a deeper hole. Where would you say, because some people will say that, well, this administration is already ebbing out. And those who are saying that maybe you should scrap subsidy before it goes. Would you first of all think that that is a wise idea?
Well, it's an idea that needs to be really, really managed. Because again, I mean, you talked about crude oil theft. You know, for some reason, I think the current administration took his eyes off the ball. You can see that now, from November last year till now, we are beginning to gain some grounds back. But some people say, yeah, that was when they signed on Tom Polo. I mean, so again, everywhere in the world where you have resources like that, you have to involve the community. You know, you can't bring in mercenaries from outside to protect. It's going to break down after a while. So maybe they have to go back to Tom Polo and co and say, guys, secure these assets. And indeed, as of last month, as of December, we went back to being, you know, the largest producers in Africa again. We had come to number 3, behind Angola, behind Algeria, you know. So now we're back to number 1, as it were. So we're hoping that, I mean, I think they're talking about 1.6 million barrels today, as of now, which is great. Can we, you know, whatever arrangement they're putting in place, continuous engagement, you know, let's secure that part of the economy, you know, which is very important. Even though it's also an opportunity in disguise for us to develop other parts of the economy, because if you look at our budget on a yearly basis, the only assumption that's made is crude oil. And I've had to challenge even the current minister, you know, very in a nice way to say, guys, why are we only thinking about, when you prepare a budget, the first thing you put there is crude oil, 1.6 million barrels a day at X amount of dollars. Now, let me say this. Well,
it might not be
you know, it wasn't. Come think of it.
The biggest
it's the
GDP
biggest
contributor.
Dollar, perhaps it used to be the biggest dollar earner. When last did NNPC remit anything? That's what you ask yourself. So we just have there, putting a huge contraption there. You know, it's like a big grapefruit with no juice in it. So it used to be the biggest revenue earner. Indeed, now the non-oil sector is doing a lot better than the crude oil sector. So we just do that. So again, so we not only fall into the subsidy trap, because again, what is this subsidy? We're not even sure. And it seems like the government couldn't use the instrumentality, the power that is government, to interrogate and know exactly, number one, how much of this petrol are we bringing in, you know, on a daily basis? How much are we using? Do you know what? I conducted a research around, you know, in terms of, you know, petrol usage in Niger, in Cameroon, in Chad, in Benin Republic, which are our neighbors. All of them are francophone. And do you know that they don't even use a fifth altogether? Cameroon uses about 58,000 liters a day. How many do we, barrels a day in terms of liters? Nigeria uses about 445, according to the law. That's the one we sterilize from our daily production for local usage. Chad uses less than 5,000. Benin Republic uses about 25,000. Niger Republic about 25,000. So all of them use about less than, maybe about 100,000 barrels. So even what we say we're bringing in and we're losing to our neighbors by smuggling has to go beyond these countries that I mentioned. It has to go as far as Mauritania, as far as Congo Republic. That means that someone is lying. I mean, people just sit down and cook figures for us. So subsidies, yes, need to be let go, but how? Are you going to have it gradually? How do you ensure that it doesn't cause pandemonium? Because if you suddenly remove subsidies and the prices of everything shoots up to 200%, how do you manage that? And you're going to have people on the streets. That has brought down governments in the past.
And speaking about
so we have to be careful about that. However, indeed, we have now agreed that because of the fraud underpinning this subsidy thing, yes, it has to go at some point.
And speaking about those basic prices, looking at all of those economic review of how it performed in 2022 as put up by NESG, what should the common man out there expect? I mean, if you look at it, basic things such as bread, maybe a little bit of the high-end one, which was about 300, 350 at the time, within a space of 7 years, now you're looking at between 1,000 and 1,003 or 1,005. Bags of rice, bags of beans, the same things. So what should they expect this time, this year? Because all of these figures won't just go back to what they used to be, no matter who you elect. Moving forward.
Indeed, yes. I think that whoever is going to take over this government come May 29, let's even put it this way. If we're talking about 2023, it's half and half. This current administration still has a bit of time, if they're going to be
achieved, if they're going to policy-wise,
I believe it's
that will impact on
policy implementation-wise. Indeed, a lot of some policies are in place that can work, and of course, governance is something you do on a daily basis, and listen, in their own interest, for example, look at this fuel thing, scarcity thing that Mark mentioned earlier on. And now in some places, in fact, the pump price is 300 Naira. In fact, I've seen 500 Naira maybe somewhere in Lagos. Wow. And people are still queuing to buy now. So they're going to have to ask themselves, are we going to leave this at 500 Naira? Or what do we do? How do we intervene? Now, in controlling the prices of fuel, for example, in looking at that for the purpose and to assist the common man, there are several things you can do. The government has instrumentality to check international prices, to call those, NNPC, I believe, still imports all the fuel in, so what exactly is causing the snafu, as it were, so intervene. Is it funding they need? Is it what? They may decide to intervene, or they may also decide to let market forces begin to take over, in which case it's probably going to end up around that kind of numbers I mentioned. And then, of course, but however, it will be said that they came in at 87 and took it to 500, which and that's for some. However, again, now the issue then becomes inflation is a big issue. Inflation, that's where it affects the common man. And what we have realized about inflation beyond the textbook is that the price you pay for a good depends on your negotiating ability. Forget about this concept of equilibrium. Equilibrium is a very nice concept on paper. It doesn't exist. What is the equilibrium price of Gary, for example? You can negotiate with your customer at any point in time in the market. So in the same way, what that means is that if you have a good, where the seller holds the bigger hand, all right, they can absolutely dictate the price. In which case, there may be times,
if the seller, for instance, got it at a certain price,
how do you know?
She has to cover his bottom line.
That's the thing. Now, you see, in talking about economics, you have to also look at social psychology. So, if for example, I'm a fuel importer, remember 2011 when we had this huge scandal? It was a case where people were coming and saying, well, this is how much I bought it, And I think that's why NNPC is the one importing now. I'm not sure they've changed that regime. It had to be a case of NNPC, but NNPC itself needs to be interrogated. So now, if you tell me that this is how much you've bought it, how do I know? You have more advantage in that market, in dictating what happens in that market than I do. In which case, if government wants to do the right thing for the people, it's a case of saying, yes, whereas you're a private sector player, but you're still under me as a regulator, you're under the regulator. Can we then expect that the right thing will happen between the regulator and the operator in that regard to know exactly how much it was? It came in, and circumstances of you having to sell at that point. That's why you see that the deregulation that we're talking about in the market is not about absence of regulation. In fact, when they talk about deregulation, it means better, more transparent regulation of the market. And of course, the fact that the common man should not get the short end of the stick.
And the elephant in the room, foreign exchange.
Yes.
As an import-dependent country, we continue to see how the parallel market, I was looking for the right word.
Yeah, they said they should stop calling it black market. But why is it not black market if it's black?
It's not people's reality.
The parallel market, continues to drive prices and continues to dictate trends. And the CBN continues to say, well, they're still, they're not recognizing that market.
Yes, they cannot.
Understandably so, but how did they begin? Because rates at some point must converge. If people are going to do things right, if people are going to go through the system to do things, we cannot continue to let the parallel market dictate prices, can we?
Now let me just let you know that, let's call it the black market. There's nothing wrong about calling it the black market. The parallel market, the idea begins to give it a sort of legitimacy. It's an illegitimate market. And this market exists in every country. In the United States, for example, there's probably a market for dollar, okay, and for exchange in other currencies, controlled by the mafia people in New York or those who are in the drug business. If you are going to access that market, you're taking a big risk. The difference with Nigeria is that the parallel market, or the so-called black market, which you now call parallel market, is there in the open, is the most accessible. It's not seen as anything wrong anymore. The market that should exist in Nigeria should be the BDC market and the I&E window market. And those two markets should be the same. That's what we're saying. So the BDC, the point is that, of course, unfortunately, the central bank has about 6,000 licenses out in different people's hands. And there's what they call, which I heard the president of the BDC Association called ungoverned spaces. There's about 10,000 different other entities selling dollars in the so-called BDC market. That market needs to be streamlined so that the central bank can better control what goes on in that market. And if they have to intervene in that market as a player, not as not as the prime mover, as a player, then so be it. The I&E window is the one that's more transparent now. I think it's driven by FMDQ in Lagos. Financial Market Dealers quote is part of that. So everybody goes in there to stake it, and you can see that that market ticks on a minutely basis. You see, and that's the market. That's where we should look. And perhaps the BDCs, if they are better organized, should benchmark that market. In which case, you then have a fusion. You see, what's called the black market can never be integrated into the official market. It is going to be driven. It is supposed to be driven on the ground. It can never, and it should not. However, what perhaps the issue becomes is that, is the central bank going to be ready to meet people's requirement between the I&E window and the BDC window? Meet people's requirement for Form A transactions, invisible trade. People are traveling abroad for. I believe they can give it a shot. Honestly speaking, I believe they can give it a shot. And the rest of the market will, you see the called black market, you have to go on the ground. If you're going to deal on the ground, for example, people standing under trees and so, whatever you get there, they have to let you know. And that's what the next administration must do, even though this administration. And let me tell you, some of the, that in every market there's psychology involved. You'll be shocked. So what we're trying to say now is this. Now, where the problem is, Chamberlain, is that the demand for example, corruption money. If you wanted to pay ₦1 billion to some sitting politician, in bribes now, you can't take a cash to him. And you can see that the central bank is even making it even more difficult with this new, tendency towards, cashless society, with the currency change and all of that. So I think that the institutions are doing the right thing. And I think that the institution also needs the support of people like us and the person on the street, So all of that is that they're doing the right thing by moving towards cashless. My main thing about the cashless is how, first of all, you can see that they have now put a law in place to say no more cash withdrawal from public account. Why is anybody withdrawing cash in a public account? To do what? You know, and so there's this corruption aspect, issues of drug dealing, issues of all of that kind of illegal transaction, prostitution, all this kidnapping and all of that, that depends on the dollar. Now, it will then give the security services, you know, a leaner focus
Mr.
to focus
Joshua,
on some of those things and reduce them.
Perhaps,
Indeed,
the institutions are doing the right thing, and nobody's asking that, you know, the parallel market be, you know, be integrated into the sector.
The point is that
the thing is this, that, you know, there has to be disincentivization. It cannot be possible.
How in your thinking?
I'm not the one answering questions.
You know, so,
I'm not the one answering questions.
You know, I like
the
word you use, disincentivize.
If it is not disincentivized, you know, there are questions as to how it is that, you know, you'll be having this I&E window. Even the BDCs, the licensed BDCs, are selling the dollars that they get at the so-called rates of the black market. They're not selling at the CBN rate.
Because
there
needs to be a certain reform of the BDC, and it's political. I wish that Buhari would have been able to do it, you know. A lot of the guys who stand under the trees are from northern Nigeria, so to speak. I believe that if Buhari calls them together and says, guys, this can't continue.
Why must it be him? Why can't the president?
You don't understand that the currency of a country is not something for the central bank governor to handle. The currency of a country is the country. It's the representation of the country. If you have a good currency, you have good people. You have
but we've seen the EFCC clamp down on such people.
And therefore, forget all the EFCC. The president has a role to play. And whoever comes after this president also has a role to play. I just believe that Buhari could have sent out a word, called them. A lot of those guys can be incentivized to get out of that market. A lot of them. A lot of the guys you see under the trees are touts who are doing the hustling for the big men down there. So you can actually reform the BDC sector.
Mr. Fasho, you have that sort of market in existence, and then you now say that, you know, you're putting rules in place for the banking system.
You have to do what you have to do.
We're going cashless.
Absolutely. You have to do what you have to keep moving.
People are just wondering, you're not going to wake up. How is this going to help our economy?
Absolutely will help. I mean, I told you one, you know, the fact that you're stopping cash withdrawal in public sector, bang on. You're going to have more value for money. It's going to be more difficult for people to get cash to deliver for corruption. Because now that you are having to withdraw, you can only withdraw fewer money and cash and all of that. It's going to reduce. So if you're a contractor and the man is saying, go and bring this one, so, where will I find the cash? And we have to move to that direction. We need that cashless more than any economy in the world. You know, so now what they call value for money in public procurement, the fact that for now is about only 30% of that budget that you see, 23 trillion, on the capital side especially, only 30% actually gets to do what it needs to do. Now, if you go more cashless, you mean that you have to do transfer for most of the things that you have to buy. Then you're going to see that 30% moving to about 60, 70%. That's an achievement.
When you talk about this cashless, you know, affecting the value for money, maybe you should explain a little further.
Absolutely.
Because there are basic things that people expect to happen if we have to have that huge kind of impact we want on the value of Naira. We don't have uninterrupted power supply. Manufacturing is suffering. It's almost next to zero. If you don't fix these two things, no matter these policies you put in place, how will the value of the Naira suddenly jump up?
So basically, if you ask me about power, for example, I have my own thinking around that. And I think that what should happen is that we should press in every source of power of energy that we have, including the coal. If there's still coal in Enugu, we have to go back to it. We saw that the same countries that were pushing green energy and all of that stuff, when they had their backs to the wall, Germany and co, they went back to their coal. And then they come to Africa and say, oh, those sources of energy. I was in 2014, I was in Zambia, 2016 rather. I was in Zambia in the AFDB meeting when a bitter argument occurred between Akumi Adesina and a certain American woman, I don't know who she was, who was pushing this idea that Africa should forget every other source and go green. And Adesina was of the opinion that, look, forget it. You guys are taking your own whatever. It was a very bitter argument, one-on-one. These guys were right there on the rostrum. That you guys are doing your own, taking your own resource and so on. So my thinking around power is that every source, and I think that also the universities and polytechnics should step up. The departments that are relevant, energy and co, we should do a lot more experiments in the communities around them, such that I think that rural electricity electrification should be powered by those experimental things, at the universities and so on, so that the federal government and co can deal with the urban areas and the industry. That's one. You mentioned power. You mentioned what
manufacturing.
Manufacturing. You see that part of what we're trying to achieve with some of this cashless thing is to also bring in more money into the banking sector for on-lending, all right, to the manufacturing sector. And you can see that, of course, this present administration may have got it wrong on a number of things, but I think one thing they've done, which part of which I support, is the fact that they've really tried to take the attention of Nigerians towards local manufacturing and value addition. Even if you call it maybe, these 43 items that central bank saying, look, we're not supporting with foreign exchange. The furniture industry, for example, has exploded in Nigeria. If you went to any furniture shop now, chances are that you're buying a Nigerian product, labeled as a Turkish product.
At a very exorbitant price.
Well, so that money, they're making profit. If it's exorbitant, but they're making profit, that money comes back into the system. A lot of people have money in this country. Then the fiscal aspect then comes in, how are you getting your tax? Let me tell you one thing very quickly. In the UK, I've done business in the UK before my company. In the UK, what they do is that you cannot run a company account except you get in a given year, except you get your annual returns from the company house, which is the CAC we have in Nigeria. Only about 3% of companies in this country get their annual returns. And in order for you to get your annual return, you have to show evidence of tax payment. If any government asks me, I'll say that we implement that policy in Nigeria. Nobody can run a company account in this country except you show your annual returns. And you cannot show your annual returns except you pay your tax, even if it's minimum tax. If you do that, the collections will explode in this country. So I wonder, that a lot of our people, maybe they don't have the exposure, those who run the
government
economy.
People have got to lead by example.
I don't know why they're exactly.
The way they spend public funds.
Absolutely. I mentioned that earlier, Chamberlain, it's clear. If you are collecting money from people and you're using it to ensconce yourself in so much luxury and all of that, buying all sorts of things, traveling everywhere, anyhow. In fact, I would say that the next government should be thinking of working for free.
Not a bad idea. Because if including all those...
at least to a certain extent, maybe a couple of years, work for free.
I don't know if they can do without the ESTA codes and all of those things because it's huge. Sakwe Fasho, as an economist, thank you for your time, as always. Can we take one or two messages?
Yes, I see this from Sammy. He says, I'm saddened by how your guest is rationalizing corruption. Our society is broken because of corruption and transactional politics. It is obvious that these guys don't get it. We can't continue to do the same thing and expect a different result. That is from Sammy. I see this one from Opola Damilola. Perhaps Lagos will quickly run through them.
Well, absolutely. Take a look at that one. I completely agree with Dr. Abayomi. That what we need in Nigeria is practicality. Nigeria and Nigerians really need that someone who can weigh the advantage of many against few.
Well, Henry says, righteousness still exalts a nation and the people prosper when good men rule. Politicians and their advocates should desist from rewriting our holy books. God has provided Nigerians an alternative with the least or no baggage at all. Let's search and vote right.
And the last email from Adenike Awe says, as long as we're not going to vote for a saint, the character of the candidate does go a long way to ensure that we're not giving the reign of our government to people of questionable character. Why should I knowingly vote for someone with questionable character? If the parties will not do their due diligence and weed out these candidates at the primaries, then it is the duty of the electorate to reject such people at the polls.
Yeah, so go ahead. Keep talking about what you want to see, who you want to vote for, why you want that person to lead, because, I mean, many think that we cannot afford to break the moral compass of this country. Well, that is the show today. We do thank you all for watching. We'll see you next time. I'm Chamberlain.
Some argue that the compass is broken. We need to fix it. Thank you so much for watching.
We need to fix that compass, either with glue or whatever. Whoever we choose as our leaders actually says a lot about us as a people. So let's choose to be good people for the benefit of our nation and our children. I'm Kayode Okikiolu.
Before you can vote, you need your PVC. Go get it, whatever it costs. I'm Ayo Makinde. Have a wonderful day.